Up next, Authentically Detroit sits down with Dr. Christal Lawson, the founder and owner of CLE Strategic Solutions, LLC, to discuss self-care and protecting your spirit during times of grief. But first, this week's Hot Takes from Bridge Detroit. Sex worker scandal adds to frustration with Detroit Police Oversight Body, and Detroit set to receive $210 million from largest ever Michigan budget. Keep it locked. Authentically Detroit starts after these messages.
Hey, it's Stephen Henderson from WDET and Bridge Detroit. If you love listening to Orlando and Donna's incisive interviews and conversations on the Authentically Detroit podcast, I hope you'll also listen to the podcast I host, Detroit Today, from WDET on Detroit's NPR station. Detroit Today is a daily podcast where I talk with community leaders, elected officials, and residents of Detroit, the region, and the state about politics and the values that animate our communities. Listen to Detroit Today every day on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, y'all, it's Orlando. We just want to let you know that the views and opinions expressed during this podcast episode are those of the co-hosts and guests and not their sponsoring institutions. Now, let's start the show.
Hello, Detroit and the world. Welcome to another episode of Authentically Detroit, broadcasting live from Cass Corridor at the WDET studios. We're a content partner to BridgeDetroit.com. I'm Donna Givens-Davidson. Thank you for listening in and supporting our efforts to build a platform for authentic voices for our real people in the city of Detroit. We want you to like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on all platforms. Orlando is out today, but I'm joined by someone I've known for many, many years. Dr. Christal Lawson, founder and owner of CLE Strategic Solutions, is here to talk about self-care and protecting your spirit during times of grief. With the passing of both JoAnn Watson and Brenda Hill, I thought it was important to touch on this subject. Christal, welcome to Authentically Detroit.
Thank you, Donna. It's a pleasure being here.
Yeah. You know, we used to have these great conversations back in the day when we were at the Vanguard Community Development Corporation. It was almost like we had a talk show at work, right?
It was. It definitely was that. Yes. Had a great time doing it. Learned so much, though, because it's not often that you get a chance to really have authentic conversations. And that's exactly what we were having then.
Right. I don't know if it was just authentic conversations. It was almost a little comedy, too, though.
Comedy.
Kept it laughing. But, you know, one thing always strikes me about you, and that is you always, even back then, would take the time to talk about people's feelings. And sometimes it would drive me crazy. And I didn't understand, why is it drive me crazy to talk about people's feelings? I'm talking about getting people jobs and houses, and you want to talk about feelings, you know? And I realized, you know, sometime later as I continue to grow as a human being, that was my shortcoming. That I was never really that in touch with my own feelings. Mm-hmm. And so when you talked about feelings, it could be threatening to me. Mm-hmm. Do you ever see that happening with other people?
Oh, definitely. I just think our feelings is something we weren't allowed to feel. First of all, if ever you express the feelings, like, what's that? You don't have time for that. So it's not something that is primary in the lives of people, even still.
Yeah.
So I think because of my own personal journey, growing up on the east side, the only girl, the oldest, I had a lot of them. Growing up with my parents who had issues, I just had a lot of things to say and a lot of emotions. And so I always felt that people didn't get that opportunity or have that space to express how they really feel about something. So it kind of comes. I'm excited
to talk to you like 20 years later about feelings. I talk about feelings now, Christal. You should be proud of me. But I'm excited. And since then, you've gone on to get your doctorate, and establish your own practice. So we're going to talk about all of that. But right now, first of all, how was your weekend? Before we get
My weekend was great. I had a great time. Went to the concert to see the Dramatics, and the OJs danced and sung all night. Wow. It was really good.
Now, where were they performing?
They were at Shane Park or Aretha.
They were
at the Aretha. And then I also volunteer with Crime Stoppers, teaching conflict resolution in the community. So that was great. We have partnered with some churches who we're trying to get youth to come in on a Saturday. Now, I just think the marketing for that has not yet been figured out. But we quarterly go out into the community and teach conflict resolution. So that was Saturday. So a pretty great weekend.
Oh, that's great. You know, I was just down the street from you on Friday and on Sunday at Hart Plaza at the African World Festival, which is back at Hart Plaza for the second year of the road in a row. And I have to tell you, it was wonderful. Friday night, you had George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic. Oh, my goodness. I was like, wow, I'm back in my youth, right? There were people in wheelchairs dancing with me, so I realized we weren't quite young anymore. And then on Sunday, we had an artist. I wish I had written her name down so I could remember it, but there's an artist who was from Mali. Mm-hmm. And she sang, and there was this artist who was also performing on. I said, "This is the most beautiful guitar I've ever seen." Mm-hmm. And so I was telling Kevin about it. Kevin was at work at the time, and he said, "Yeah, that's called an African kora." So it was a kora. It's absolutely beautiful instrument that is the precursor to the guitar, but also to the harp. So it really, really exciting time. We're all sitting there dancing, and it felt like Wakanda in Detroit. I'm looking at all the buildings downtown, looking at everybody dressed up majestically in all of their clothes. So it was really a wonderful weekend.
That's awesome. Yeah. I didn't get the chance to get there. Normally I would have, but I didn't get a chance. But I was watching it on Facebook. Everybody was posting, so that was great.
Yeah, well, you know, maybe next year, and you can get together with me next year. But right now it's time for Hot Takes, where we run down some of the week's top headlines in the city of Detroit. And for Hot Takes, our first story is Sex Worker Scandal Adds to Frustration with Detroit Police Oversight Body. And that's by Malachi Barrett from Bridge, Detroit. An alleged sexual encounter between the former chairman of the city's Police Oversight Board and a sex worker is the latest embarrassment for Detroiters who have long complained about the board's dysfunction. The Board of Police Commissioners accepted Brian Ferguson's resignation Thursday, one day after he was issued a misdemeanor citation by the Wayne County Sheriff's Department for indecent, obscene conduct. An undercover deputy allegedly caught Ferguson, a leading voice on the Civilian Oversight Board, receiving fellatio from a known sex worker. Ferguson's resignation loomed over a community meeting in a new center, Union Hall, a few hours later, where a new chairman was sworn in with the promise of rebuilding credibility and trust. Chair Quantez Presley told Bridge Detroit the board's biggest challenge is restoring the public's faith. Presley said the board is already moving forward from Ferguson's resignation, and he doesn't want the incident to distract from their work. A tawdry sex scandal doesn't begin to explain the board's challenges. Commissioner Willie Bell said residents should be frustrated with Ferguson's alleged misconduct and more. Bell said the board has a reputation for being disorganized and hasn't made a dent in its backlog of citizen complaints against officers. Meanwhile, the board and its staff are facing multiple investigations by the city's Office of the Auditor General, Office of Inspector General, and the Detroit Police Department's Internal Affairs Unit. Law enforcement is at a critical point of accountability, Bell said. Something like this sex scandal happening at this level is shaking the whole foundation of oversight. You can't say it's a separate issue. This is disturbing. People should raise concerns because you can't take this lightly. It was an illegal act. He was in a known area where sex workers are working, and the community was concerned about that area. The 11-member civilian board is now down to 10 and has supervisory control and oversight of the Detroit Police Department under the city charter. The board investigates citizen complaints, establishes DPD policies, approves the department's budget, and has the final say in imposing discipline for police department employees. Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan is responsible for appointing a commissioner to serve the remainder of Ferguson's term until 2026. What do you think about this scandal, Christal?
Well, it proves one of the conversations I have often is, you know, when we look at leaders, there's an assumption that personal development has occurred or personal issues have been resolved, or that there is some integrity that can be sustained in those areas. And it's just not true. It just confirmed my theory. And of course, it's embarrassing for the city. But I just think there's so much more development that people overall need to have. And even as leaders, when do we stop and say, how do I get better in these areas that people don't see?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, they're describing it as a sex scandal.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky was a sex scandal, right?
Exactly.
And, nothing really happened to him. He didn't resign. I mean, I don't know if he paid fair market value for the services that he received, but the reality is that prostitution is the oldest profession, right? They say. And we get so upset about things like that. And I was talking about it earlier with my husband because I was trying to figure out, how do I feel about this? It feels like, okay, he did something that was wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And it's illegal because we decided to make it illegal because he wasn't doing it in Nevada. But if he was doing it in Nevada, that was cool. And I know people don't like seeing it in their neighborhoods. But we are so much more concerned, I think, sometimes about prostitutes and about or sex workers and about Johns than we are about pimps. And that's where the real abuse comes in. That's where maybe pimping is one of the older professions too. But when you start looking at the coercive nature of some of the activities, we always catch the people who are actually engaged in the act. We never catch the people who are really doing some of the worst crimes in our community. So I looked it up and I saw that, in many states, I wasn't able to find Michigan's, a pimp's, sentence is like 6 years. And we're talking about somebody who tortures, abuses, controls, and steals, and forces somebody to work for a little more wages. So it feels to me, I'm not trying to change the subject, it just feels to me like we get caught up in these silly crimes. Did you smoke weed? Did you do these things? And they're bad things only because they're against the law, but the laws don't always make sense to me.
I mean, I'm glad you said that. I didn't really know how to answer that, but really I was like, okay, we're going on and on about this. And there's so many other things that we could focus on. And I get that it's illegal, but it only was illegal because it was him. Anyone else that they may have found, it would not have made the news and they would have told him to go home.
Well, he probably would not have said, hey, help me out. I'm a police commissioner. So he didn't help himself, right? I mean, that was the thing. That was the abuse of power when he did that. Is if he paid her money. But I mean, I think we have actual cases of police beating people, police framing people for crimes, and you have a backlog of cases where nobody's really been held accountable for that. So to some extent, I'm thinking, let's worry about that. But if this is what the city is embarrassed about, I'm not worried about embarrassment. I'm worried about people's civil rights being violated. And I don't think we take that as seriously in our community, because I've never seen a police commissioner step down for that kind of abuse of power. Although in recent years, we've heard certain complaints about police commissioners abusing their power one way or another. So I'm hoping we don't get distracted from the real story, which is the real abuse of people by people with badges. And by the way, a police commissioner does a police commissioner carry a badge? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Neither a badge nor a gun. So we're not talking about somebody who has the kind of power to create the kind of harm that policing sometimes, inflicts on our community. I care, but not really. I'm sorry that he's stepping down. I know that he was working on some things, and I hope that somebody picks up the mantle and continues to work on that. If he was married, if he had a girlfriend, if there was somebody who depended on him, obviously he harmed that person.
Exactly.
And so I'm not trying to be not like compassion for that person. And, I always feel bad for sex workers who are doing so under duress, who are doing so because they are, either addicted to drugs or, there's some other kind or hungry or some other kind of situation where they feel this is something they have to do. And I also don't want to minimize the fact that a lot of times these relationships, I think most of the time these relationships are extremely exploitative. And it's really unfortunate that we live in a society where women have to do that in order to take care of themselves and their children for whatever reason. So I'm not trying to be insensitive, but it just feels like it just is more important than it should be to me. But, heck, maybe it's just Monday, and I was looking at the story thinking, we've got bigger fish to fry. There's another story I do want to talk about, though, that's also important, and that is the city has received, I'm sorry, I lost my story, so I have to pull it back up. The city has gotten a it's set to receive $210 million from the largest ever Michigan budget. That's huge. And that's also by Malachi Barrett, as well as Kaylee Licklider from Bridge Detroit. Dozens of Detroit projects are set to receive roughly $210 million once Governor Whitmer signs the largest state budget in Michigan history. State lawmakers passed an $82 million budget that is expected to get the governor's approval. In the coming weeks, I always do this, an $82 billion budget that was expected to get the governor's approval in the coming weeks. A Bridge Detroit analysis of the massive budget bill found the state will direct significant funds towards dozens of Detroit projects focused on infrastructure improvements, cultural institutions, housing developments, and local organizations. Eric Lufer, president of the nonpartisan research group Citizens Research Council of Michigan, said Michigan has more money to allocate for community projects thanks to an influx of federal pandemic relief aid and smart budgeting during the COVID-19 crisis. I might add smart budgeting also the refusal of Republican lawmakers to pass budgets and spend some of this money. I'm not going to necessarily praise the prior legislature for being smart when some of this money that could have helped people just sat in, wait and for somebody to decide we're going to spend it. But anyway, the state, by any measure, had more money to work with than it has in a long time, and certainly more than it has over the past 20 years when budgets were very tight, Lufer said in an interview. The core functions of the state government have accounted for close to 100% of all appropriations being made in the past. The idea of setting money aside here and there for local projects, this year's budget had far and away more than we've seen. After approving the budget, House Speaker Joe Tate, Democrat of Detroit, celebrated the work of the Democratic lawmakers who hold a majority in both chambers of the state legislature for the first time in nearly 40 years. Tate said Detroit lawmakers were instrumental in securing funds for workforce training, affordable housing, restoring health care for retired firefighters, addressing a gun case backlog, and neighborhood improvements. Our budget is a statement of our priorities. As Detroit legislators, we know that what benefits our city will benefit all of Michigan, said Tate in a statement. So what do you think about that story? All of this money, $200 million, are you happy about it? Do you know how the money is going to be spent? Do you know anybody who's going to receive any of those funds?
I do not at all. And actually, I did not hear about this story until just now.
Well, I know that some of the money is going to go to our cultural institutions that are not getting a millage, and that is the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. Guess how I know that? Because my husband is there, but also the Detroit Historical Society is scheduled to get some money. And there's investments in various projects in our community that have been really hard to fund. You remember back in the Vanguard days when it felt like all the money dried up and state government stopped really funding the kind of work we needed to have happen in our community. And it's been really hard for many people to do projects based on what they perceive as needed. These past couple of years, through ARPA funding and through some of these appropriations at federal and state level, you've been able to see some projects that are more innovative in nature and sponsored by the community get funded. There's also projects that are pork barrel projects that legislators who have a lot of power and influence are able to include in these bills. And that's my concern. Is the fact that you have this combination of good projects and goodwill, and I think all of the projects in Detroit are goodwill. And then you have some projects that continue to support kind of corrupt politicians and some of their pet projects, either former politicians or current politicians who are connected to things. So I certainly hope that, though we get the attention, that the negative spending or some of that negative stuff does not impact how people are feeling about some of the good projects that are being supported. It's important to me that we understand. I was talking to somebody not long ago who was complaining on as a ridiculous comment. She says, we look at how much money is going into nonprofits across the state, and we still have problems. So what are nonprofits doing wrong? I thought that was... So I laughed, and she said, why are you laughing? And so I explained to her my laughter because really government has really started shrinking about 20, 30 years ago and stopped doing fewer and fewer things to support the community. And as the government shrinks, that means that other people have to pick up the slack. Over the past few years, largely because of the COVID-19 pandemic, government actually grew a little bit in terms of its spending. And the Republican legislature tried to slow down the flow of those funds to a lot of important projects in the state. But overall, I'm happy that they're being funded.
Yeah, I think that's good. I guess because my sector has been community mental health and mental health for so long, and yet the funding for mental health, I'm told, is growing, but I don't see a lot of change in the organizational structures or the outcomes for the people who suffer with mental health. And so it's just, I'm not sure on how that is being impacted financially.
Yeah, community mental health is maybe growing, but I don't know if it's growing at the rate of inflation, and that's the challenge, because if you compare dollar to dollar, things look better. But if you really look at the fact that inflation is so high, we're not necessarily able to purchase more. I know that community mental health is under constant threat of privatization because a lot of healthcare insurance agencies really want to take control of it and have that money spent in their sector. And right now it remains in the public sector. I'm not sure how I feel about that, other than when we want to reform things by privatizing them, they rarely get better. So,
exactly.
We privatized schools to improve public education and it went down. We privatize a lot of city services and they don't get better. And so I'm hoping that community mental health remains a public function. We have a grant, and we've had one for the past few years, to hire young people in the summer under community mental health grants. And so we have 34 young people working for us this summer on an internship, learning how to communicate and build power and express themselves. So I'm super excited about that partnership. And I know that there are flaws in all of the systems that operate inside of our communities, but I also know that the Wayne Integrated Health Authority has been making some progress, or at least attempting to make progress in accountability. Until a few years ago, my cousin was the chief medical officer there. Okay. And so Dr. Carmen McIntyre kind of kept me apprised of all of the work that she was doing around contracts. But now it's time for us to take a break, and we will be back to you in a few minutes.
Bridge Detroit is your news and engagement platform that is telling the stories of Detroiters rooted by community priorities. Started in 2020 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, the newsroom has already established its footing as the go-to source for hyper-local perspectives that ask the hard questions, brings accountability, and searches out real solutions. It's free to become a member of this award-winning news organization. Visit bridgedetroit.com today to sign up to receive the news delivered right to your inbox. Bridge Detroit, by Detroiters, for Detroiters.
Founded in 2021, the Stoudemire is a membership-based community recreation and wellness center centrally located on the east side of Detroit. Membership in the Stoudemire is available on a sliding scale for up to $20 per year or 20 hours of volunteer time. The Stoudemire offers art, dance, and fitness classes, community meetings and events, resource fairs, pop-up events, the neighborhood tech hub, and more. Members who are residents of the east side have access to exclusive services in the Wellness Network. Join today and live well, play well, be well. Visit ecndetroit.org.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Dr. Christal Lawson, founder and owner of CLE Strategic Solutions, LLC. Christal, once again, welcome.
Thank you.
Super excited to talk to you about this. As you know, last week, actually 1 week ago today, we lost JoAnn Watson.
Yes.
And she was a giant in so many ways in Detroit. And so Orlando was on this newscast, and he was on this podcast, and he started crying, and I was sitting here dry-eyed. And I didn't cry until the next morning, right? Because I told you I'm not in touch with my feelings. But then Brenda Hill passed away a couple days later, and that hit me like a punch in the gut, because she's my age. She's an activist. I kind of know her. We rub shoulders. We're not close, but I know who she is, and I've admired her commitment and her fight. And so that felt more personal even than JoAnn Watson, although I did know JoAnn. And so it was sort of like, wow, this is a lot of grief. And I started listening to people talking about how they were feeling. And it reminded me of the early days of the pandemic, where people were dying and there were no funerals, there were no memorials. You're sort of like, okay, let's go on. And a couple of years later, you're having a lot of mental health issues. You're having a lot of violence in our community. And I think it's all connected. What do you think?
Oh, I definitely agree. And I think what we've been experiencing the last few years up until now, it's a traumatic grief. I mean, no one saw any of that coming. And I mean, even watching from afar, from a distance, it's like, oh my God. So it's secondary trauma, it's primary trauma. So there's effects from trauma outside of just normal grief.
Now, when you say secondary and primary trauma, can you explain what those terms mean? Well,
primary trauma, of course, is when you lose a loved one that maybe in your family or a close friend. And so you're impacted by that grief. But then secondary grief or trauma is, I don't even know you and I'm seeing this, I don't even have to know the people who are dying or the people that they're connected to. It's just that we are all familiar with death and grief. And when it's sudden and when it's in numbers, or even when it's traumatic in terms of gun violence or things like that, that's a secondary grief. So we already have our layer of grief from our loss, losing a parent, losing sisters, losing friends. But then watching other people lose family members in the way that we experienced it during COVID. So that's secondary trauma.
So how does that connect to violence, though, and mental health issues?
Wow. I just think a lack of resilience. I know growing up, when people died, they just died. No one said how you feel or explained the process of even death. And so I think on one hand, we say death is a part of life, but we don't really understand it when it happens and in the way that it happens, and depending upon your relationship. So the ability to cope with sudden loss or tragic loss is just not highly prevalent. Mm-hmm. We say it, but I don't think we process it. And I think, like you mentioned, we just keep going, and then suddenly you crash.
Right. And that's what happened to me, right? On Thursday, I was just crying, and it was just Friday, I was crying, and I was out of control. It was like, why am I so sad? And then I started apologizing. I'm sorry I'm crying. I'm sorry for being inconvenient. I know it's not convenient to see me in tears. Is that also part of the problem we see?
I think so. I think we were not allowed the space to cry. In the first, we had a lot of things to cry about, but we were not allowed to cry.
Well, you remember the old saying, you better stop crying before I give you something to cry about.
Before I give you something. And so what you shut off your tears.
Right.
You shut off your emotions, because apparently it's bad to cry if you're going to give me something more to cry about. Right. And just in our households across the country, that's what we were told. And so as you get older and you experience life, I think you hit capacity for all of these experiences, and then you have no choice but to cry, but you have not processed that, or you cognitively don't understand what's happening, because you were never allowed that space. And so it feels abnormal. You think it's a negative, or you think something wrong is happening, when tears is actually healthy, because it's a purging and it's a releasing.
Yeah, I a few years ago, I saw this presentation for Dr. Joy DeGruy at the Keebler Center, and it was amazing. She talked about post-traumatic slavery syndrome. It was like, wait a minute, what is post-traumatic slavery syndrome? Does that even make sense? But the way she described it is that when people are in oppressive situations and they experience pain, they adapt to the pain they experience. And if you don't get any therapy, you don't get any treatment, then your adaptive responses are passed down to the next generation. And then that next generation has its own level of trauma. And then their adaptive responses and your adaptive responses are passed down. And we have had uninterrupted types of oppression running through our families since we've been here in the United States, before it was the United States even. And so a lot of us had these inherited responses. There was a time when tears did not make sense. There was a time where a woman had a baby, put that baby on her back, and kept working because she had to. And nobody had time for your tears, okay? And if you didn't learn how to hold in your tears, the overseer or whoever it was could cause that to happen. And so I can understand how we've gotten to the point of learning how to function in oppression. But even when we're not dealing with that kind of oppression, a lot of us are still maintaining those behaviors. How do you break those cycles?
Well, first of all, like you mentioned, I think having this conversation, first of all, being allowed to just talk about how you feel and think. And I think we're not living in oppressive situations, but mentally and emotionally we are, because we have not come to the place of knowing that that's normal, or how we feel is to be able to express it is actually a positive. It's actually a strength. So although we have moved forward in life and we have access to many things and many opportunities to get help, but the mind or the emotion says, I'm still accustomed to what I've been accustomed to my entire life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and there's also this whole thing, people, it's easier and more socially acceptable, or at least people feel safer expressing anger than pain, right? Listen, I'm not crying or whatever. And we hold it in and I'm not mad. I'm not sad. I'm mad. We're always ready to take that anger response. And when you see people who have less stability, it seems like those are the people who take the anger response into violence. Is that true?
I think it's true because, for one, that's how some people cope, is through anger and violence. But when you pull off the mask behind anger, there's sadness, there's depression, there's a layer of other emotions, and it just come out in anger. And so I think, too, when you look at today's culture, they lack the resilience that we once had. And so anger and outbursts of violence is impulsive because there is a lack of concern for life also based upon some of their experiences.
Well, I mean, we aren't concerned about their lives, right? So if nobody's shown concern for my life, I hear that. And then I see these young people who have been tossed around in foster care and whatever, and nobody takes the time to care about them. They feel unloved and uncared for and unprotected. And we say, you don't care about life. They don't feel cared about. And there's attachment disorders that people develop, right?
Attachment, abandonment, rejection. And so when I say they don't care, they don't know to care because no one have shown them how to care.
Right. But that gets blamed on all of us, right?
It does.
So it's like, oh, these people don't care about life. No, it's not these people. It is these people who a lot of times have had issues that have never been resolved. And in schools, teachers see it, principals see it, social workers see it. The kid gets in trouble, but nobody intervenes really to and protect that child.
That's true.
And then when they become a menace, it's like, why don't you care about life? Well, why don't we care about them? I always think it's sort of reciprocal equation.
Yes.
And we miss the first part of that equation, which is love children when they come here.
And true part of that is who taught the generation before them how to love themselves.
Well, but we also have mass incarceration. We have bunches of parents thrown in prison where they cannot love their children.
They cannot love. I mean,
I was at this event the other day. It was talking about women in philanthropy, and the speaker was saying I'm trying to think of her name. She's an amazing young woman, and she started an organization called the Pure Heart Foundation for children of incarcerated parents. Both of her parents were serving prison sentences, and she talked about the impact of that on her and how that impacts the ability to process information, to learn, to do anything well. So I'm sorry. I just wanted to point that out.
I had a client once. He was 14, and in school he was writing poetry about death. Well, the school thought he was a risk for the other students or for the school because his poetry was about death. But when we met, his brother had been murdered in a drive-by at his age. So in his mind, at any point of me walking to the bus stop or going anywhere, I'm going to die. So his impulses and his emotion came out in poetry, but no one took the time to see why. They just assumed he was at high risk for violence when actually that's what he had been exposed to.
They assumed he was at high risk for violence, and their intervention was, let's protect the other kids.
Let's protect the other kids, and let's kick him out.
Let's kick him out. So to the streets. Now, when I always talk about him, I'm going to stop talking about Ethan Crumbly one day, but here's a kid who's drawing pictures of guns and bullets and all of that, and they call the parents up to the school, and they say, get him some help. They don't kick him out. They say, get him some help. And that, to me, is the distinction between the dehumanization of black kids and the humanity that is intact for white kids, even those who show violence, because a black kid who behaves exactly like Ethan Crumbly is expected to go to a juvenile detention facility. With Ethan Crumbly, people are wondering, why didn't his parents get him therapy? And I'm like, wait a minute, this is a new conversation for me, because I didn't know we were supposed to get therapy for kids who were talking about that.
Right.
And so he's thrown out, and then he's thrown into a system with other kids who were thrown out. Mm-hmm. And all of these kids who have been discarded in our society, forming these relationships with each other, can actually form a gang or something like that. And then we get mad at them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's true. I had that discussion this weekend with Crime Stoppers and the people in the audience. They kept, these kids or they, but the apple don't fall far from the tree. and there is no connection. Is even when a parent brings a kid to counseling, when they do try to get them help, they disconnect from their child's issue.
I mean, that's normal.
But it's not.
It's normal for parents to disconnect, and they need that family therapy so they can learn how. I mean, in dysfunctional families, that happens, right?
Right, but what I mean, when they bring up from help, they still don't believe that it's anything that they need to do to help the child.
Yeah, I mean,
it's the child.
Yeah, I mean, having worked with families and stuff like that, I see that. It's very rare that you see parents saying, you know, what did I do wrong? It's always a kid.
Or what do I need to do better?
What do I need to do better? But I mean, we blame the parents and we say this is the tree, but the tree is growing in an orchard that's poisoned. And so if the tree is growing up in this orchard, then everybody's poisoned. The parent was treated that way when that parent was a kid, and their parents were treated that way when they were the kids. We have these big systemic issues, right? And so how do we deal with that? We have parents who never resolved their own grief as children, and now they have children, and nobody wiped their tears. So I'm going to go back to an earlier statement I made with you where we talked about crying. And I said, you know, when you talked about feelings, it made me uncomfortable, right? Because I wasn't allowed to talk about feelings. Well, imagine if I had been abused and I was complaining about abuse. Would a parent see that even as abuse? Or why are you complaining about that? You know, because the parent never had anybody care about their harm.
At all. And that's why we were taught what happens in this house stays in this house.
Right. It's historic. If we talk about kids today, but the reality is this has been going on for some time.
For
if you
centuries.
really look at history books, you cannot brutalize a people and expect them to not bear scars and not behave in ways that are harmed. We were harmed, we were brutalized, and now there's this need for healing. And until we get to the point where we say, let's work on investing in healing resources in these communities, we're just going to keep seeing these norms of parents raising kids and being unable and ill-equipped to respond to their needs. And again, so many kids are not in homes with parents. So many kids are in homes, especially by the time they're teenagers, they're couch surfing and other stuff. So what specifically do you do to intervene when you see kids in these situations?
And honestly, and it's when you talk about systematic issues, I think having worked with you years ago with the North End and creating that place for those kids to come, it was a safe place. And so it allowed them the opportunity of free expression. They did it in poetry. They did it in conversations. Each one had their favorite staff person. But I don't see that.
So we've got to, as a community, I think I agree with you, invest in safe spaces.
Yeah, we don't see that. We don't have that. And now people are saying, oh, you need therapy. But the real truth is, even in the therapy session, there's no guarantee, because if you have not yourself come to a place of, well, I want to stop this madness that I've been experiencing or my mother experienced and so on and so forth, and you have a certain innate resilience to do it, we're just having conversation.
You know, I really feel like we need love. I really think
absolutely.
Love is the antidote to so much of what we see.
But then what is that for people?
Well, young people, you know, when they were coming to the Spot Teen Center, they felt cared for.
They did.
Felt loved.
And they felt heard.
And that's part of love. And that helped to change them. They changed themselves. I think, you know, there's all kinds of love. There's agape love. There's romantic love. There's, you know, family love. But I'm talking about the love where I care about you.
The unconditional love.
You matter to me. And having young people know you matter to me makes a difference. And we don't invest in you matter to me kind of interventions enough. We do not. Even therapy, it is recommended that they participate in group activities or group projects, because a teenager is not going to sit down with the stranger who they don't trust, who they don't believe care about them in the first place, and share their thought or emotion, or most of them don't even really know how. So I've spent time just talking. Let's just talk. Whatever's on your mind. But then you go right back to an environment and not blaming, but you go right back to the place that you're coming here to get help for. Well, we need to look at whole family solutions too, because parents are socially isolated as mothers, right? As mothers who mother teenagers and little kids didn't always do, sometimes you need help.
You do need help.
When your kid acts out, you feel responsible, you get blamed, you're mad at the kid for making you look bad. the whole community needs some type of, we need safe spaces for community members, not just kids. And I think going back to what you were talking about, during the pandemic, we had socially isolated people, and people weren't getting anything. And so I don't know, I just feel so strongly about just giving love to people.
Well, that's what's needed. Love is the antidote. And then helping people to believe that they deserve the love, because that's another layer. You could try to love me, but if I don't feel I deserve it or don't know what it is, or
I think when I'm talking about it, going back to what you were saying about these safe spaces where you're loved in this space, because if it's one-on-one, it's even harder. But when you're in a community of people and you have more people to connect to, it makes some of that healing easier. I agree with you. Feeling that you deserve love can be a lifelong task for many, many people.
Exactly.
And you can't help everybody, but you and I have seen young people be helped. Can you talk about some of the young people?
Oh, look, it's so many of them. It's just a joy to see, and I can't remember names.
Don't give me a name.
Right.
Just tell me a story.
A story of a young man who did not have his parents, who is now a phenomenal parent of many children, who, positive on Facebook, sending affirmations, helping other kids, and taking responsibility for his life and raising his own children, all 5 of them, and just expressing himself as a young man and taking responsibility for his mistakes. So that definitely came as a result of him spending time with us at the thing, at the spot. And so...
we might be talking about the same young man, and it's like I loved listening to him complain about his kids. So let's talk. We're going to talk about some more stories in a minute, but we need to take another break.
Okay. I got a couple of stories.
Have you always dreamed of being on the airwaves? Well, the Detroit Eastside Engaged Podcast Network, or DEEP for short, is here to make that dream a reality. Located inside the Stoudemire, the DEEP Network offers studio space and production staff to help get your podcast idea off the ground. Doesn't take a whole lot of work to get started. Just visit the Authentically Detroit page at ecn-detroit.org or call Sarah at 313-948-0344.
Bridge Detroit is your news and engagement platform that is telling the stories of Detroiters rooted by community priorities. Started in 2020 by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Stephen Henderson, the newsroom has already established its footing as the go-to source for hyper-local perspectives that ask the hard questions, brings accountability, and searches out real solutions. It's free to become a member of this award-winning news organization. Visit bridgedetroit.com today to sign up to receive the news delivered right to your inbox. Bridge Detroit, by Detroiters, for Detroiters.
And we are back for the final segment of this podcast today. Christal, we were talking about stories, and I think sometimes we keep everything really hypothetical, but when you tell stories of people and you see the change, it's easier for people to begin to conceptualize what this might look like. So give us another story.
Another story of a young lady who, at the point of coming to the center, very low self-esteem, not really as expressive, not sure of her own beauty, grew up with the greatest confidence I've ever seen, college graduate, business owner, and now a mother and wife. And to see her transform and bloom and know it.
I remember there was this young man and his sister was at the teen center, and he was very quiet. He didn't speak to anybody ever. And we had these competitions where we would teach young people spoken word, and they would get up and they'd perform with each other. And so we had all the young people perform. This is after a couple of years of him being there. And we thought we were done. He said, wait a minute, my turn. And he got up and he gave the most profound performance of the day. And everybody was looking like, what the hell in the heck did this happen? Why did you speak? We had no idea that he would. I think that when you see the human potential, and we just kept giving him love. You didn't have to speak. We didn't have a whole lot of rules. We had rules about how you treated each other, but there were not a whole lot of rules. It was a place for people to be whole. I see that now at the Stoudemire Wellness Hub, where we invite the whole community to come in. And so you have family members of all ages coming in for various classes. I think we have 26 classes a week right now.
Wow.
And 1,000 members. And so we do everything from hustle to knitting to, I think we have a bid whiz club now. I stay out of that room because I can't play bid whiz. But we do a lot of things just to get people connected to each other, believing that human beings have the potential to heal each other. Some people still need that clinical care, right? Some people need a deeper intervention. But I think you mentioned this earlier, that when you couple that with some of the other resources that people have in the community, you can do a good job. And we used to have more community interaction. We had blocks. Now blocks are abandoned, a lot of abandoned homes, and people don't know who their neighbors are. A lot of suspicion and mistrust because
a lot of isolation and even therapy, from my perspective, has changed. I don't use a lot of clinical jargon, or we don't talk a lot about clinical issue. It's more of a wholeness approach, mind, body, spirit, more so, because people don't believe in the system anyway. They don't. Our culture especially, it took years and thousands of years to even get to this place. And so I think it's changing. It has to change if it's really going to be impactful. So that's why I kind of come out of the community mental health space, because it still the systematics of it does not necessarily make the impact that's needed.
I find that's true. Sometimes I think the models we use are Eurocentric in nature, even when you talk about youth development. For so many years, we've heard about positive youth development and all of these youth development techniques. And then a couple of years ago, I'm looking at these young people and I'm like, wow, we are engaging in youth development without acknowledging that they do have parents at home that also need help and resources. And we can't help these young people by ourselves. It's so much better if you partner with a parent. Funny story, it's not really a funny story, but there was that one time when this kid was in trouble and the parent didn't want them to move in. And we had a social work intern ask the parent, do you care about your child? And the parent went ballistic over everybody. And I was like, oh, let me talk to this parent. So I talked to the parent and I said, if we give your child a job, will you let that child come home? And then the parent proceeded to tell me everything that was wrong with their child. So by the time they were done, I was pretty sure we didn't want to give them a job, but I made a promise. So we did anyway. I'm just joking. And the young person ended up blossoming, becoming an amazing leader. And it was like, okay, now that you are working with my mother, that's a difference to me than having you work alone. There's that value and understanding that children want to feel good about their parents.
Absolutely. I created the power of parenting when I worked at Don Bosco to partner with the parent to let them know that we were not against them because their kids were in trouble. How can we help you? And we would have dinner, and it allowed them opportunities to share their frustrations as being a parent. I mean, right. That comes with a lot of responsibility and heartache and stress. And so it was an opportunity for the kid to also say, wow, they care about my mother or they care about my father. So you can't do one without the other.
Right. And a lot of times we have to understand that there's except in rare instances, nobody is going to love your baby more than you. Mm-hmm. That's just, I believe that. Yeah, I believe we love our kids. We may not know how to love them the way they should to be loved or they want to be loved, but we love them, right? Nobody's going to love your baby more than you.
Right.
And you have your own dreams for your kids. And if we can get those things aligned and we can align with parents. So that's part of my dream, is to move beyond youth development to really have it be whole family and community development, understanding maybe you don't have a caring parent, so you need this neighbor right here. And things that used to happen naturally, back in the day, we didn't use adoptions. People just raised somebody else's kid and called it their own. Mm-hmm. There was no formal process for that. We have a history and a track record of knowing how to take care of other people's kids as if they're our own. And of returning ourselves to some of those roots, away from these clinical and legalistic kinds of barriers that make it difficult.
Because it creates tension and mistrust. So what I share with parents or anyone that even comes to counseling, I tell them I'm changing that. What's your story? Because we all have a story. And I think once people feel more comfortable about sharing what their story and that there's value in their story, even though they may have experienced a lot of heartache and pain, there's still value and strength in your story.
Absolutely.
And so I think when you get people to understand that, and then sometimes we need to share our story with our kids. You know, we were raised that we could know nothing about what happened to our parents or things that they experienced, but that have to change in order for the family to become whole. We have to know our story. And then as parents, your child has a story. And it may not look like what you think it should look like, but they have one.
Exactly. And so learning how that. Now, one of the reasons I want to talk to you today, in addition to working with youth, and certainly that's the foundation of everything we need to do. But in addition to that, you know, so many mothers, so many women are struggling because of all of that we've been through as children, in relationships, always learning to put other people in front of ourselves so that somehow we forget to take care of ourselves. Mm-hmm. I tell young mothers all the time, don't forget to take care of yourself. Take yourself on vacation, buy yourself some nice shoes. I remember one time I had one pair of shoes and I was buying stuff for everybody else. And so you started working on this thesis of I choose me. And I was like, yes, I love it. Can you talk about what that means?
Ooh, what that means is even for myself at hit a place in life where I looked at how all of my decisions were made based upon perception of others, and in a very dark place, and decided I choose me. And so what that meant was for women to not feel guilty for making decisions for their own happiness and for their own peace, for their own joy, whatever it takes. If it just takes an hour in a bookstore to begin that journey of choosing me, because what I discovered is that women, we were more connected to what we do than to who we are and what we need for our spirit, for our mind, for our hearts. And so whenever I would ask a woman, well, who are you? They would say, you know, I don't have a clue, because I've been the mother to this person. I've been the wife. I've been the sister. I've been the aunt. I done raised kids. I done this and that. And it never dawned on me that I had a right to choose me. And so it was also for us to see ourselves the way that God does. I mean, he loves us and he says we're fearfully and wonderfully made and all of these great things. Let's agree with what he created us for.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I always feel like I have to be productive. Being unproductive is really, really weird for me. I'm like, okay,
same way.
I'm home. If I don't do anything, I feel like I'm being lazy. I feel like I'm letting people down. I always have to be productive to kind of earn my keep, you know, in this world.
Absolutely.
You know, let me earn my keeps. You know, service is a space, is the price you pay, rent you pay for the space you occupy. They told that to women, okay, because it's like, who do I serve? How do I take care of other people? And I was looking at these women. I was looking at myself even. I'm like, okay, I'm teaching and podcasting and running a nonprofit. And then I'm, you know, grandmother. And at what point do I just say, do something that makes me feel good? I don't really prioritize that or know how to prioritize things as simple as rest.
Naps.
Oh, come on. No, I don't nap.
I just started.
That's a strange concept, because then it's like I've lost all this time
of
things I'm supposed to be doing, and I have this laundry list of things.
That's survivor mode.
You're right.
That's survive. You know, we were taught to survive, and that's not healthy. It's not healthy, because in real life, all we have is today. We don't know what tomorrow brings.
Yeah.
And so I do this exercise with women. It's so weird to me, but I came up. So if you had to name yourself something else, what would it be, and what would you be doing? And this smile and this peace would come over women when I asked that question. Well, okay, why aren't you doing it?
Mm-hmm. You know, for so long, I wanted to write a novel. I've gotten about halfway through a novel, and I haven't found the time to write more than 2 pages since January during the Christmas break. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely love it. It's really kind of, I imagine all of these things, and I can get into my imagination and away from all of these serious things. Instead, I immerse myself in all of these problems and policies and challenges and everything like that. And so I'm looking at, the loss of 2 women who were fighting for change that did not occur in their lifetime and probably won't occur in mine. And it's like, well, what will I leave? A legacy of she tried? And I'm not saying,
I
but
understand.
What about me trying to create something that is reflective of me? That, and so I committed myself to investing in myself as a result of that. But are there other things that we can do in addition to, rest and napping and maybe even, doing some things that are actually fun for us and hobbies? What other things can we do?
Well, it's simple things like you mentioned, the writing your thoughts out. Just what do you think about the most, or what do you love about who you are, or about the world? Just kind of that self-discovery. I call it the journey to self-discovery, because it sounds like, who has time for that? But when you really be still and just take your time, I mean, it's a great reward after that, because you learn so much more about yourself. Like now I took a job, and it's a job, but it's really not. And I never would have taken this job.
Can you talk about the job you took?
The job I took is with hospice care. And it's called Comfort Care. And I have had some of the most amazing conversations. Today was with a woman who was 100 years old, and she was healthy. She didn't even qualify. But one of the things she said was, make sure you do what you want to do and have the health to go along with it. And so just taking small steps to loving yourself, to complimenting yourself, to just creating that safe space and being intentional about your time and space. And I think because we were brought up to be productive, it's addictive. It's addictive.
Yeah.
It's addictive.
Yeah, and I'm somebody, and I know I did a good thing because I did something productive.
I've done something, but if you're not taking care of yourself, then how much more productive can you be?
I saw this one person say years ago, if you don't take care of yourself, somebody else has to.
And
so, in fact, being what we call selfless actually pushes a burden onto other people to take care of you. Maybe not at this moment, but at some point
eventually
in the future.
So putting self in self-care. What does that look like?
But what is self-care? Like, is self-care coloring books? Like, I went in this
thing. It can be.
But, for me, that's not self-care.
Not for me either, because I can't sit still in color. But for me, it is even watching a movie that I enjoy in peace, in the dark. I've learned to just lay in the dark and just, detox my thoughts. Or having conversations with people that you don't know. You learn a lot about people. So kind of stepping out of your own way and looking at the fears that you have about doing something that you enjoy.
And here's my challenge, dinner party. I go out, and if I'm hanging out with people who work in the same line of work as me, I have great conversations about all of the issues of the world, and people start looking at me with glazed eyes like, girl, stop, right? But then when I'm hanging out with people who don't work in the same field, and I don't have the opportunity to have those conversations, sometimes I don't know what to say. And it's like, hi, awkward black girl. Remember Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, Lisa Ray's first thing, because I related to that, because I'm just like, hi again.
But you've always been brilliant to me, Donna, and some of the conversations you have on Facebook, I don't know how to respond. However, but you also have the human side of you, and I think tapping more into that, well, what were your 20s like for you? Or what were your, woman conversation? You have that ability, but sometimes we're just so stuck in the things that we're used to. Like me, I'm used to having conversations on issues, emotions, and mental health, and, how are you going to change that struggle, that problem? So talking about curtains or blankets, I'm not interested, but there are so many other conversations to have. And I think just discovering what those are.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a reminder, though, when I find myself out of topics, that I need to do something different, that I am somehow becoming too one-sided, and that's not me. Those are problems outside of me. I'm somewhere inside of that. And having to find that. And I really do encourage any woman who's listening.
The journey to self-discovery.
The journey to self-discovery. And guess what, men? You need it too.
Yeah.
It's interesting because when I met Kevin, he and I were both on this journey, and we kind of entered into the journey together. Men have an even harder time sometimes discovering and talking about feelings than women do. Although they sometimes have easier choosing themselves, but that's a whole other thing. They're choosing the wrong things for themselves sometimes. Hint, is his name Bryant George, the former police commissioner. That is not self-care, sir.
Not at all, but he probably thought it was.
Self-destruction, okay?
He thought it was. He thought it was.
So, but all of us, I think that we live in this world. I have this book about the myth of normal, where the author talks about, trying to maintain your health in a toxic culture. And there are aspects of our culture that are productivity focused, that are capitalistic and all about producing this work ethic, the Puritan work ethic, and all of these norms and things that get pushed onto us so that we really don't know how to take care of ourselves as well. And that's when it shows up in addictions. It shows up in suicide. It shows up in gambling addictions, eating, whatever that is, it's showing up in different ways. And so what I'm hearing from you, I think, is yes, therapy, because you're a therapist. So I want, yes, therapy, CLE
coaching,
strategies,
theraping,
coaching,
whatever, yes.
whatever, but non-traditional. So Christal's not going to bring
I'm
the
very
traditional
non-traditional,
way,
very.
but also finding ways to do things that are rewarding and that are socially supportive. And also maybe we can all take a moment to try to create space for other people who need that as well. So we got to change systems, but sometimes you have to be the change you want to see.
Be the change. I love ladies' night, and ladies' night doesn't have to be we hanging out getting drunk. Ladies' night, we're coming together so we can talk.
Yeah, I have a book club. In my book club, we sometimes have books, but usually we end up talking about things that aren't books. And then we talk in between book clubs because we don't always meet. Everybody's busy. But I think that, the ladies' night, that whole concept of coming together, book club gave us a reason to come together. We're going to talk about this book. People don't read books before the book club, but it gave us a reason. And I think we need to continue to do that, and maybe even not for a reason, just because we want to have fun.
Just because we want to have fun, and because I love this. Yana Van Zant, when she say, "Am I my sister's keeper?" She say, "No, I am my sister." We are more alike than we are different, and I think we may have different stories and different exchanges, but deep down inside, we all want love, like you mentioned, and want to be treated appropriately and want to have an opportunity to be authentic.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. Getting to the authenticity.
The one thing I think is when you give love, you receive this reward immediately. It feels good to give love. And I think sometimes we don't always think about that. We're, rationing it out because we don't want to be hurt, but it feels good to extend yourself, and that creates that community that you want to see. So sometimes do for others. I think that's actually in the Bible. Do for others as you would have them do unto you. And that is give people love, and you can receive it in return, because sometimes you're not getting that love back because you're not giving it, and people don't know how to love you.
You think you are, right?
Yeah, they don't
love
know how
thy
to love
neighbor
you.
as thyself,
right?
And so if we're loving our neighbor as ourselves, then the exchange, the fruit of it, definitely will show up.
Yeah. I found that over the years, I've learned how to be less of a closed person and more open to receiving people and telling people what's going on and my feelings and stuff like that, because we're also very closed and competitive and ashamed. And so sometimes I speak openly about things. People are like, I can't believe you said that.
Oh, yeah,
but it was
me too.
liberating to say it, right?
Yes.
Now that I've said it, now I don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, guess what? Y'all know. So, I think this is important information, and I really do hope to get you over to the Stoudemire soon.
Yes, I'm coming,
and also have you talk to our staff about some of this. I think that it's important for us to focus on feelings, even as we're trying to change the world, right?
I agree.
All right, so that's it for today. If you have topics that you want discussed on Authentically Detroit, you can hit us up on our socials at Authentically Detroit on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can email us at authenticallydetroit@gmail.com. And right now it's time for shout outs. Let's start with you, Christal. Do you have anybody you'd like to shout out or praise?
I would like to shout out my son, the actor, Mr. Mac Wells, in congratulating him on his firstborn, Gianna Grace Lawson, my first grandchild.
And she's beautiful.
Thank you.
Congratulations. I'm really excited for you.
I am too. I'm so excited. I can't wait to get on that plane.
Yeah. And he's in Atlanta, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's wonderful. I'd like to shout out Njia Kai for this year's African World Festival. It was amazing. It was even better this year than it was last year, and last year was transformational. So I really want to all of the organizers, everybody who put that together. I think you did an outstanding job, and it's really helpful to feel proud about your heritage, about your people. Also, that's also part of, healing, right? Is to feel good about where you came from. I always want to take young people on these journeys so they can learn more about all the great things in history to help balance out some of the negative stuff that you always hear. At any rate, thank you so much for joining us, Christal.
Thank you, Donna. I appreciate you as well. Always so much to learn when talking with you.
Likewise. Catch the wave. Thank you.